this is all highly relevant information for all of the manufacturing equipment providers. But for Axcelis in particular, let's jump to a couple of developments that could help them expand their market share outside of those power chips.
Hey everyone, let's talk about Axcelis Technologies.
And as we do, our faces are back. Thanks for our patience as we tried out a couple of new recording formats the last couple of weeks. We're going back to the original though.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Most would vote it's a good thing for you.
We'll see what the people want. We started purchasing Axcelis Technologies stock at the beginning of this year in 2024.
That's right. If you've been with us for a while, you know that we were highly skeptical of a lot of the companies involved in the power semiconductor part of the market, especially as it pertains to electric vehicles. We talked a lot about that last summer, not just Axcelis, but also some of the extreme hype that was taking place in air test systems. But as the end of that growth cycle came to an end in the fourth quarter of last year, the valuation started to look incredibly reasonable, if not downright cheap. As we said, beginning of this year, we started buying, and then we revealed in recent months how Axcelis has become one of our favorite semiconductor manufacturing equipment providers right now. And as you can see from that last chart, here we are up some 40% from the bottom. Let's talk about what happened. And is this recent rise in Axcelis technology stock a sustainable rise? Is it going to keep going?
You may be getting used to seeing this chart that we've made regarding market segments and the current cycle that we're in. You can see AI infrastructure, of course, in max growth, all-out mode due to companies like NVIDIA. Consumer and smartphone had that bottom in the autumn of 2023, starting new growth cycle now. Cloud and enterprise, early 2024 was the bottom for that, and now it's beginning that new growth cycle. Auto and industrial is where we're thinking that we're currently at the bottom. So hoping for a start of another new growth cycle later at this year in the second half of 2024. And we're going to focus primarily in two areas of the market segmentation in this video, mostly in auto and industrial. And then in AI infrastructure, we'll talk a little bit about where Axcelis fits into that as well.
And of course, as we mentioned, Axcelis is a semiconductor manufacturing equipment provider. So that critical choke point right there in the middle of our semiconductor industry flow. And if you haven't seen this video from a few months ago, we do a detailed breakdown of all of the publicly traded businesses that participate in this critical choke point of the manufacturing process. As far as Axcelis is concerned, it is a specialist in what's called ion implantation equipment.
Other ion implantation companies are Sumitomo Corporation, located in Japan, and then a big competitor, the biggest competitor for Axcelis would be Applied Materials, the industry generalist. And then borrowing this chart from Applied Materials, in that implant portion of the chart on the right side, you can see the blue bar, that's Applied Materials, part of the market share. And then you see that gray bar above of that, and that is where primarily Axcelis plays. A large portion of that market is Axcelis, and then smaller companies as well in ion implantation.
That's right. And as you can see from this chart, the ion implantation segment of wafer fab equipment spending is very small. We're probably in 2024 at just shy of 3 billion in total market, compared to 90 to 100 billion in total expected wafer fab equipment spending. Somewhere in that ballpark, let's just call it maybe 100 billion. And so let's say ion implantation, roughly 3% of wafer fab manufacturing equipment spending. Now, the big market leader in this segment is Applied Materials. We talked about this a couple of months ago over on our Discord channel. You can get access to that, just $5 via our Semi Insider membership. Check that out. But we talked about this a couple of months ago. Back in 2011, Applied Materials bought this small specialist called Varian Semiconductor Equipment. At the time, We have highlighted in this press release, ion implantation was an even smaller segment of wafer fab equipment, approaching 1.5 billion per year. Switching to this slide from Axcelis Technologies, Applied Materials has done a lot to expand that market share along with Axcelis over the last decade plus since that acquisition. Again, approaching nearly 3 billion in total ion implant market per year.
Now, to recap exactly what ion implantation is, we have a video from Axcelis Technologies that helps us understand what part of the process this is in making a semiconductor. You have to dope the silicon substrate with other materials in order to make it a semi material. And they do this by passing an ion implantation beam across the surface of the wafer and adding those doping impurities to the wafer. So you can see that passes over many, many times to add those impurities to the wafer.
Early this year, we did a video explaining in a bit more detail about how ion implantation actually works. If you're interested in a bit more high-level technicality of that, link to that video below. If you're not, here's an easier way to think about this. Silicon wafers are like cakes being baked. Now, for some of those silicon wafers that eventually go on to become, let's say, power chips, the type of chips that help manage how much electric current flows to the eventual device, for those power chips in particular, just a plain cake probably isn't going to cut it. And so ion implantation is used to fill that silicon wafer with another substance that helps alter the electrical conductivity of the ultimate device, or in other steps, again, like that video that you showed, Casey, maybe a different type of ion beam, a lower power ion beam is used to coat the surface of the semiconductor wafer with another material, again, to help alter the final electrical conductivity of the device. We're just baking cakes. That's all we're doing here, folks.
As you saw in some of the previous slides, the total addressable market for ion implantation has nearly doubled since Applied Materials acquired Varion in 2011. And you can see this broken down into the various segments that make up the semiconductor industry. Power device and general mature chips make up the majority. And then you have image sensors, memory chips, and advanced logic chips there on the right, which make up a smaller portion of the semiconductor industry. Axcelis Technologies estimates 70% of the ion implantation market is for those mature processes. Taking a look at Axcelis's actual market revenue breakdown, you can see that nearly 90% of the shipped system revenue in 2024 will be made up by the mature market, either power device or general mature chips. And then they also do have a small amount of revenue coming from memory chips. Their DRAM, you can see 10%. Advanced logic was only 2.3%, and image sensors at 3.3%. We'll be talking about that advanced logic chip when we get to the AI infrastructure portion of the market segmentation. But you can see auto industrial, that is where all of those general mature chips are coming from, which all indications show that we're currently bottoming in the current cycle.
So this is all highly relevant information for all of the manufacturing equipment providers. But for Axcelis in particular, let's jump to a couple of developments that could help them expand their market share outside of those power chips, which, as you showed, make up nearly 90% of revenue this year, expected revenue this year, between advanced power chip applications and other general mature manufacturing processes. Earnings season here for chip stock investor gets kicked off a little bit earlier than normal earnings season for everyone else. It starts with Micron. And so we just did our quarterly earnings update on Micron last week. And they talked about how memory, and in particular, high bandwidth memory, or HBM3E, the third generation of these DRAM chips that get stacked on top of each other and are getting used in AI systems like NVIDIA's accelerated computing semiconductor systems, is paving the way to the next growth cycle for memory. So you showed in that last slide, Casey, system sales to memory chip makers only expected to be 10% in 2024. But in recent commentary from Axcelis management at some investor events, they said it actually looks like the memory market for them is going to fully rebound this year and add to meaningful growth for the business in 2025. So Micron's earnings update could be indicative that Axcelis might be making a bigger push into memory chip manufacturing with their ion implantation machines.
Axcelis is also looking to expand into more markets. You can see that just last month, Axcelis announced that they were expanding their business to operations in Japan with both silicon and silicon carbide semiconductor power device customers in Japan, and also into the advanced logic production capacity. We had a couple of videos regarding Japan's semiconductor expansion plans, and one of them specifically was about Renesas. If you haven't watched that video yet, you will definitely want to check it out. They're doing some amazing things at Renesas. We'll link that video right here, as well as down in the description. Axcelis also seeing the opportunity in Japan and participating in that growing market. We partnered with FinChat to supercharge our research and visuals. You can take a look at the discount below. 15% off a membership from our code below gets you all of the same tools that we use here at Chipstock Investor. Take a look at that. Now, Nick, shifting to this chart, Axcelis has been experiencing a market bottom because of their focus on general mature chips. But how did they perform in this downturn?
Well, it's not over yet because we don't have the Q2 2024 numbers out yet. So when we have those, that will show up on this chart as June 2024 on the right-hand side. They've already told us to expect a slight year-over-year decline in revenue, and as a result, a bit of a decline in GAAP earnings per share. But if you look at this picture here on a year-over-year basis, not sequential, you can see the last peak in December 2023, $310 million in quarterly revenue. So obviously, sequentially, we're looking at a sizable decline. But on a year-over-year basis, Axcelis actually generated essentially the same amount of revenue as a year ago and actually higher profitability than a year ago on a GAAP earnings per share basis. And so that means they're outperforming many of their peers in the general mature manufacturing part of the semiconductor industry, including automotive and power chips. Here's a quick recap of their guidance for Q2. You can see a very slight sequential decline is what the outlook was. That's what was provided. And of course, a year-over-year decline in earnings per share. However, more outperformance compared to many of its industry peers. They also have no debt with $530 million in cash and short-term investments on hand. And they've talked about wanting to deploy this very strong financial position they're in to expand their market, perhaps even via acquisition. I'm not going to speculate on what that means. We'll have to wait until they announce something, if they do at all. But things are looking pretty good for Axcelis.
With that decrease in outlook, the valuation for Axcelis will get worse in Q2 before we see sequential improvement. Currently, Axcelis Technologies stock trades for around 19 times trailing price to earnings. On a one-year forward basis, the stock is trading for about 22 times forward price to earnings, and that's because of that expected decrease in earnings per share. Now let's take a look at this metric on a price to free cash flow basis.
Yeah, a very different story using this metric. Axcelis trading for a seemingly very expensive 32 times trailing 12-month free cash flow, but just shy of 17 times expected one-year forward free cash flow. Very reasonable forward-looking valuation. And the reason for the improving free cash flow is that particular metric is expected to improve more quickly as we hit the cycle bottom for Axcelis and its sales. In addition to them hitting that cycle bottom and returning to growth, you can see when the free cash flow calculation, capital expenditures are a key input you subtract capital expenditures, spending on property and equipment from operating income to figure free cash flow. The company front loaded some expenses here during the last cycle top, and that's likely due to them expanding some of their own manufacturing lines to crank out more ion implant machines in the coming years, expecting a very sizable next wave of growth for the power chip market. And apparently, it sounds like other markets as well, advanced memory, perhaps a bit more advanced logic. So if capital expenditures come down or at least stay lower during this next turn from a cycle bottom to a return to growth, that's another reason why that forward price to free cash flow looks so darn reasonable. So that said, this looks like a cheap stock. Casey, what do you think? Axcelis Technologies, mid-cap business competing against heavyweight applied materials, our oldest position in semi-manufacturing equipment. Does this company even have a chance? Why bother with it?
Yeah, absolutely. They have a chance to carve out a very nice part of the market for themselves. They're a specialist, of course, versus the big generalist in applied materials. As we could see from the addressable market, there's a lot of room for ion implantation. In the mature semiconductor manufacturing, we expect that cycle to start to grow again. So that will lead to some growth for Axcelis, as well as that foray into advanced logic chips. We've been adding to our position for Axcelis Technologies since the beginning of this year. We plan on continuing to do that. It's emerging outside of our small cap basket of stocks, so it could become a core position in our portfolio in a couple of years.
Yeah, it certainly could. The valuation does look very reasonable, even after this recent 40% or so run up in just the last few months. We have high hopes for this one. And not just because it's an ancillary play on power chips, silicon carbide, electric vehicles. As you said, if it can weasel its way into more of the manufacturing process, that makes that valuation look all the more reasonable. Management seems to think that ion implant process could be as crucial and critical as lithography, especially for the power chip segment of the semiconductor industry. But we'll see. We'll see how this plays out for the other market segments. This is definitely a company to get yourself acquainted with if you're interested in semiconductor manufacturing.
Make sure you check out our videos on Axcelis and some of the other companies that we have in this space. We'll link a couple videos. We'll put some down in the description. And consider joining the Semiconductor Insider. Once again, it's only $5 a month, and it is a lot of value for the money. You get a lot of great content, education, exclusive threads, as well as our live Q&A sessions over on Discord. Make sure you check it out. Very well worth your while as an investor. And if you can, please subscribe to the channel. It is a free and easy way to support us here at Chipstock Investor. We'll see you again very soon. Take care, everybody.